Welcome, this is Grandmaster Jerry Fastly, sponsoring us with another episode of MMA Power Talk Sport Karate at the Dojine.com. Today we're going back to the days when your mustache was like well, we'll talk about that. Anyway, this gentleman, I actually seen him fight for the first time in 1981. He was a light heavyweight. He beat out one of the guys that, well, pretty much the legend. Won't mention his name right now, but okay, I will. He beat Toki Hill at the U.S. Open. Now, this gentleman went from a light heavyweight down to maybe even lightweight at one point. Not only a phenomenal competitor himself, but has had probably some of the top fighters of all time and quite a few, I think 3 of the top maybe 10 women of all time competing were his students, and maybe even more. But gentleman from South Carolina has traveled all over the world, and he's an extremely busy person. Had a fight against some bad weather today, since we do have a tropical storm coming through South Carolina. Anyhow, without further ado, my very good friend, Master Marty Knight. Are you there, sir?
Yes, sir, and thank you for having me, Jerry. This is quite an honor for myself.
Oh, it is my pleasure. It is my pleasure. We know each other for quite a while, huh, sir?
It's been a few years, to say the least.
Well, it's 2015 now, and that was 1981 when I first saw you fighting. So, yeah, it's been from the last century. So that's 100 years. Just started. Actually, it was a millennium. That's 1,000 years.
Sometimes it feels like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, but, hey, listen. Without further ado, I want to jump to the chase. What was either your motivation, your inspiration, and your desperation when you first started in martial arts way back when? And if for some reason you don't hear me, it's because it's your microphone and I put myself on mute. Okay, sir? Let's talk about in the beginning. Shoot.
In the beginning, okay. Actually, I had every intentions of graduating college and becoming a coach. I was a double all-conference athlete in high school, and all I really wanted to do was end up being a coach. But my senior year, we had the most pitiful excuse for a coach anybody could have. So between the summer of leaving high school and going into college, that was when the Bruce Lee era was going on. That was when a movie called Billy Jack was out, and I was looking for a way to stay in shape. So I started a karate class. And as corny as it sounds, I knew this was something I was going to stay with for a while because I just absolutely loved it. And during that time, karate was not what it is today. There was not 1,000 million daycare centers teaching so-called karate classes. So I got in, I stayed in for a while, and I studied it all through college. And I was fortunate enough, I lived in Anderson, South Carolina, and the number one fighter in the world was Keith Vitale in Columbia, South Carolina, which is approximately 100 miles away. So I would go to tournaments, and I would lose, and I would sit around and watch the generation of Keith Vitale and Bobby Tucker and Mike Genova and all those guys win. And so I walked up to Mike Genova one day and with my hat in hand and said, I really would like to learn how to do this a little better. And Mike was just very generous. He said, sure, come on down. And the Sunday afternoon workouts we had in Columbia, South Carolina, were legendary because at the time we had Keith Vitale, the number one fighter in the nation, and Mike Genova and John Ork. And at the time, Joey Shiflett was a green belt. And people were always driving down, like Bobby Tucker would be coming down from Greenville, South Carolina, and Jerry Rome. So I was a second-generation Keith Vitale, Mike Genova fighter. So I got to come up and have role models in the sport, like Keith and Mike, to watch. And to this day, I know I'm being very biased, but I think Keith Vitale was the absolute best ring fighter I ever saw in my life. And it was always a pleasure to train with them. And I had the luxury of never being the best in my class. A lot of people, they can be a good fighter and go off and do tournaments, come back, and never have anybody to train with. But during that time, it was phenomenal. You would see green belts like Joey Shiflett as good as most black belts out there today. So I was very fortunate to come up under what I really do consider the greatest generation of karate fighters in sport karate out there.
Well, let me tell you something. Quite a few people, very few people will be able to argue with that. And what's interesting is that the progression from South Carolina, from meaning that you're a descendant also of Mr. John Roper himself, who was Vitale's instructor, the only reason I know, because I'm probably one of the biggest fans, of the entire sport of martial arts, it didn't matter where it came from. And what's also interesting is, rest in peace, when Vitali had a chance to go travel towards Georgia with our good friend, Master Joe Corley, he also was able to develop some other fighters, including guys like Vernon Johnson, rest in peace. So whether it was John Ork or Vernon Johnson and the people that you just mentioned, like the young Joey Schiffler, who now obviously hasn't skipped too much of a beat, which is pretty interesting. I don't know if it's the oxygen or the water down in the South, but your guys last a lot longer than these guys up here in the North.
Well, I think we were the first generation coming out that were fitness-oriented. In the 80s, in the mid-80s, in 1985, I think when I first got rated top 20 in the nation. And at that time, the players had a lot of authority back then, because to have a national rated tournament, you had to get 10 of the top 10 fighters to your event before it could be nationally rated. And here in South Carolina, there was me, there was Tony Young, there was Joey Schiffler, and there was Karen Cook. And so we always got a good deal, like free airfare and free hotel rooms. And back then, the players had a lot of control over what they did. And then the Karate Illustrated magazine just did away with that rule, so the players had to fend for themselves after that. But during that time in the 80s, Joey and Tony and I were always cross-training, because it wasn't even very popular then. We were always running. I was having to run to keep my weight down. But we were running and training and doing the other stuff back then. Karate used to be, you learned to punch and kick, and you went to tournaments and you fought. But I think our generation, the early 80s, were the first ones to take the sport and really turn it into where you had to be an athlete as well as a skilled martial artist to win or place in the top fighters in the nation. So I take kind of pride in that. We were the first ones to really started cross-training and everything, which is just common sense to everybody today. But it had to start somewhere, and it kind of started with us back then. In the South, you mentioned Vernon Johnson and John Ork. You had heavyweights that were not fat people who had a black belt. You had heavyweights who were athletes, like John Ork played college football. Vernon Johnson was a seasoned athlete who moved like a lightweight. So when you said heavyweight, you just meant a more muscular, talented fighter, where in a lot of areas, heavyweights meant just fat guys who couldn't make the weight. But down south, that generation we came up in, we were all pretty much athletes who cross-trained back then. So I kind of take a lot of pride in being part of that generation.
And, the funny thing is that there's a few other people's names that we haven't mentioned, and we might as well drop them. Rest in peace to someone like Richard Jackson, and I think you guys also had Diggly Dog out there, Mike Goldman, right, and a bunch of other people, huh?
Yeah, Mike Goldman, if it was ever an ambassador of karate, Mike Goldman was probably one. At the time, he was one of the top super lightweights in the nation. He hosted his own disco dance show in Columbia, and Mike was always a popular guy, always had a smile on his face. And they called him Hot Dog, which was deservedly so, because he would always put a show on when he fought. And I fought Mike, I think, 2 or 3 times, and he always was so gracious, and he was always had a smile on his face, and was one of the great fighters you could fight, because, win, lose, or draw, you were always bumping gloves, and it was the right attitude. Richard Jackson, back then, carried point karate to a step further. Back then, people were coming into what is called PK kickboxing, and Bill Wallace and those guys. Well, Richard Jackson was one of the first in the South to mention. He was a super lightweight fighter who ended up being, I know he was a United States super lightweight champion, and I don't know if he held the world title or not, but he won it first, came along through the spinning back fist. And believe it or not, Mike Goldman, Richard Jackson, all these guys out of the Keith Vitale stable. So that speaks tons in itself right there.
Again, just history after history, but there's also some herstory. And that herstory, and you mentioned it, you had the ability not only to stay humble and give credit to other people, but let's get really specific now. Karen Cook, as a teenager, fighting against probably the most dangerous, if not top 3 most dangerous sport karate players of all time, men or women, meaning Linda Denley, was fighting against Linda Denley at the U.S. Open 1981 for the Grand Championship. Now, she must have been 15, 16, 17 years old, because she kept referring to her as Miss Denley. I remember that. And that was the first event that I actually went to when you beat Toki Hill. And you look slightly different, and you wasn't light heavyweight. But another person, or 2 other people that came from that camp also, and some of you may not realize it, Now, they both ended up having the last name Lee, but Brenda Lee today, or back to, I guess, Brenda Hunt again, and also Nicole, I should say, Nikki Carlson, now known as Lee, with your other student, Rick Lee, also became 3 of probably the top 10 women fighters of all time, even though the question would be whatever happened to Karen Cook. But how the heck did you get to do that? Let's talk about the consistency of having these women being phenomenal.
Okay, it's really not rocket science. I think I was the first one to actually, first off, men and women are never going to be unequal. They're just never going to be equal. Women are going to be better at some things. Men are going to be better at some things. That's not saying that a woman can't be a great athlete or a man can't be a great interior decorator, for lack of a better terminology. But nobody ever took the time to teach a girl how to beat another girl fighter. It's great to teach women self-defense against men, but men and women fight differently. I mean, they may look like they fight the same, but they're going to have a different strategy. They have different skill level and everything. And Karen Cook was the first girl champion I ever trained. And at the time, Keith Vitale had a girl named Stacy Dukes. And Stacy Dukes was one of these guys, actually one of these girls got there and just bounced around and everything. And Karen wanted to be like her. So what we did, we tried to formulate Karen's movement like Stacy. Karen had a lot of reach. She had more reach than Stacy. And we'd go down and train with Keith Vitale on the weekends. And at the time, Keith had moved down into Georgia training with Joe Corley. And Karen would get a chance to spar. Well, at the time, there was one ratings. There was Karate Illustrated magazine ratings. That was it. There were no 100 different ratings out there. There was no, 47 world champions every year. There was clear ratings. There was a men's champion. There was a women. That was the way it was. And Karen got to fight Stacey Dukes in a tournament one time. At Keith Vitale's tournament, Karen ended up beating her, which gave Karen a lot of confidence then. And then so we started traveling around, and Karen was only 16 fighting national women's. And the first year she fought, 1985, she won the number 1 lightweight in the nation. She never could really get past Arlene Lemus because Arlene had a lot of reach, and Arlene also had the name. And she never could get past Linda Denley, who Linda Denley was a rough and tumble fighter, and Karen was like in her rookie year. And as far as calling Linda Denley Miss Denley, to this day, I will still call Linda Miss Denley because I have that much respect for her. But Karen, she was a smart fighter. She fought to beat other girls, not to beat other guys. She tried to beat them at their own game. And I think she could have went on to be one of the best I ever had. She chose a different career. She met her husband. She went into ministry, and to this day, her and her husband are still in ministry, and that was since the 1986. And then Brenda Hunt came along, and Brenda Hunt was a transfer down from Tennessee, and she had the loosest legs of any girl I've ever seen. She really didn't know what to do with them. So instead of trying to say, all right, Brenda, you need to learn how to do this hook kick or this round kick, we started off with like, all right, Brenda, just kick him in the head. And so Brenda would just jack that leg up and start pumping, and then we'd break it down, say, hit him on this side of the head, hit him on that side of the head. Brenda actually invented a kick in our system we call the slash kick. You know how a hook kick comes up and goes across like Bill Wallace is so famous for and Keith Vitale is so famous for, and then you got the axe kick that comes up and drops straight down. Well, Brenda kind of threw one between the hook and the axe we call the slash kick, and she would just throw it up there and land it in on them. Brenda was very coachable, and Brenda was a beautiful woman fighter. You know, a lot of people think to be any kind of fighter, you have to be almost boyish, almost mannish, and everything. But the girls we had, especially the girls from my school, were very good-looking, feminine women fighters who, just made the word female athlete stand out you. And then we had Nikki Carlson come along, and one of Nikki's role models to begin with was Karen Cook, and she got to train at the same time Brenda Hunt, who is now Brenda Lee, was there. So Nikki really, really took the athletic prowess into her training regime. Like in high school, during lunch, she would go out and run around the track. She stayed in great shape. And she started fighting at 14, and she started dominating people. She was the first girl fighter. I think Brenda beat Linda Denley one time, but I think Nikki beat Linda every time they fought. I think she beat Arlene. Nikki was the first dynasty women's fighter I ever had. And she was so good that she started winning at 14, and they tried to get a rule not to let her fight till she got to be like 18 or nothing because she was winning so much then. But she was one that stayed into the martial arts, and she's given back. She married one of my black belts, Rick Lee, who was a great fighter in his own right, and now they have a school up in Spartanburg, and they're doing real well. That was the three names that pop out. Now, since then, I've had some people win national titles, you know, and right now we got some girls coming up now. I think it's going to be just as good as them. It's just that sport karate right now does not offer the recognition it had back then, because back then, if you said, I'm the number 8 flaming fighter in the world, I'm the number 3 girl fighter in the world, it meant something now. And now with all these mom and pop organizations out there, you can run up on anybody in the street and go, oh, yeah, I'm 14-time world champion. Well, back then,
I beg to differ. Excuse me, I beg to differ. And listen, so I'm going to grab the mic if you don't mind right now, because I want to reiterate a few things that you just mentioned. Now, first, let me just say that I must keep my hands up a little higher so I don't get kicked in the head, because 81 was when you was up and coming guy, not when Miss Cook was fighting. But so I was slightly off there. But I do remember her, and as you mentioned, fighting against Miss Dunley. So it must have been about 84, 85 for grand champion. However, let me just say this. Let's talk about you specifically. 1981, fighting against Toki Hill. Now, you know, I always mention that because that was not something that was supposed to happen on paper. Am I wrong?
Well, Sam Chapman had rented a bus in South Carolina, and we loaded up all our fighters. We had Bobby Tucker, Mike Goldman, Mike Geneva, Ron Alexander. We all got in a bus and drove to the U.S. Open that year. And I was going down there just, you know, to pay my entrance fee and losing the first round, because basically that's all I was doing. And the light heavyweight division that day was unbelievably loaded. It had Nasty Anderson, Steve Anderson, it had Larry Kelly, it had Mike Geneva, it had Toki Hill, it had, I think Chip Wright was there. I mean, I just Forrest Gumped my way into it. And beating Toki Hill that day, I fought Toki before up in Chicago. And I honestly thought I was hitting him first, but the center referee was Roy Corbin, and I just wouldn't get my calls. And, I mean, I just had the confidence I could do it if I ever got a chance. So down in the U.S. Open, I had the chance. That was my first big win over somebody. Toki was like the number 7th ranked overall fighter in the world at that time. And that was my first placing in the national tournament. That was actually my first picture I ever got in a magazine, was that win. So that win kind of gave me a lot of credence with the karate community, because I'd actually got into the ring and beaten somebody who was, well, to be honest with you, who was a legend. And Toki Hill was a legend. And I was fortunate enough to beat him that day. So that kind of gave me the confidence, you know, to take the next step and keep on moving down the line in the sport.
Well, just to be fair, Toki Hill was also the world champion in traditional karate during that time. He had won the world championship in traditional karate, and he was one of the first guys that crossed over from the traditional circuit, along with Billy Blanks, to what would be the open circuit without hiccuping or skipping a beat. So, again, 1981 U.S. Open, Charlie Brown was the promoter. It was in St. Petersburg, Florida. That was the first event that I had a chance to go. As a junior, I took first place in the black belt sparring, even though I wasn't officially a black belt, and I also took first place in forms for what it was worth. But what was interesting about that event in particular for me was that I had a chance to not only see you, and I seen Sam Montgomery and Rest in Peace versus Steve LaValle, and the groin shot was actually a target, which was kind of something that I wasn't used to coming from east, the New York area. But it was a phenomenal experience for me, and it was also the first tournament that I came out in the magazine, because when Ernie Reyes Jr. and Sr. went to do their form, I ran behind them, and I noticed that Ronaldo Barton, the photographer / publisher, editor, I should say, of Karate Illustrated, was taking the picture. So I ran in the background. So initially my leg came out, and then a few years after, hey, you know how it was. There was only one magazine. It came out every month, and if you can get your name listed in there, that would be phenomenal. But to get your picture, oh, my God. And I do remember that photo of you and Toki, and the reason I always mention that to you probably 9 out of 10 times when we meet was because to this very day it's called a historical fact that you just reiterated, and confirmed that that was one of the turning points of what ended up being one of the top fighters of all time, that you fought a lot longer than all of your predecessors, except for maybe Joey. And he had a hiatus for many years, so you might be competitive with him. Am I right?
Oh, I have no doubt. Joey quit karate for about, 6 or 7 years and just got into running. I kind of pride myself on this, Jerry. I have never, ever went 2 weeks without sparring. And that included, a couple of surgeries and stuff like that. I have never went 2 weeks in a row without sparring since 1978 when I opened up my school. We're a sparring school, and I'm just kind of proud of that because it just seemed to fall right into place with our Southern heritage we have down here. Like when I first started, Joey Shiflett was a green belt, and when I started training with Mike Geneva and them, and he just could just beat me up one side of school and down the other when I first started training with them. And I was already a black belt, and he was a green belt, and that taught me a valuable lesson as to what the belt don't mean a whole lot. It's the person that's wearing it. And then you go down to Atlanta, and you have the Joe Corley and the Atlanta crew down there. And then you go up in the other part of Georgia. You got Ben Kiker and his group up there. So there was never any way to go somewhere and not have competition. In 1985, that was the first year I was rated at the top 20 in the nation. In my division at the Battle of Atlanta, we had 64 people in one division. I counted them, 64 people in one division.
Now, just for historical purposes, what weight category was it? Because if I stand correct, I remember seeing you from light heavyweight and maybe all the way down to lightweight, if not lightweight, light middleweight at one point. Talk to me, buddy.
I made it to lightweight. And the reason I made it to lightweight is because, like we said, I wanted my picture in the magazine, and Joey Shiflett was the hottest fighter in the nation the year he turned black belt. He went from a brown belt to his first year as a black belt. He ended up number 7 in the nation. I was kind of a middleweight that fought light heavyweight, but I started running and everything, and I actually kind of got sick with the flu or something, and I lost a lot of weight, and all of a sudden I was 5 pounds away from being a lightweight. So I said, if I could get in there and fight against Joey Shiflett, I could get my picture in the magazine because they putting Joey's picture in there all the time. So that was one of the things I wanted to do, to get down, because at the time Joey Shiflett was the hottest fighter in the nation, and I wanted to compete with the best, and at the time I thought Joey was the best. He was traveling everywhere. He was winning everything, and I just wanted to get down there and do it with him, to say, best thing about this sport, you can always say, I got to go at it with the best in the world in my group, whether it be my age group or my weight group. Everybody's got a chance to go against the best in the world in their group.
Again, that's something that most people do not realize, and there is a big difference between North and South when it comes to karate. Obviously, during that time, there was no New Yorkers anywhere in sight. I mean, if you remember, there was no New Yorkers on the national circuit. It was like a whole other world. However, let me just say this. In the Northeast, classmates would bow out to each other because they said it was a tradition from Japan, which was a lie. In the South, it was almost like sleeping with the enemy or frenemies, where you had your classmates who were the most difficult people that would make you get better, win, lose, or draw. You didn't care. Improvement was the key, and what you said, being able to be recognized not by a story, but by the sweat, blood, and tears of the brow. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah. Joey and I, we fought 7 times in competition. I was fortunate enough to beat him 5 of the 7 times. And one of the first times I beat him, was when he was in his heyday, and we had flew out to L.A. to fight in the
PKA Nationals. It was the PKA Nationals or the Top 10 Nationals?
I don't remember. No, this was the Red Dragon something.
Compete Nationals.
1985. Yeah. It was what is now known as Compete Nationals.
Yeah, part of the Red Dragon Nationals, Lou Casamassa.
Yeah, it was Lou Casamassa, exactly, who was promoting it at the time, and he had his his wife was a good competitor then. I can't remember her name. He had a son named Chris Casamassa also.
Yeah, well, we're doing Chris Casamassa next week, by the way. Oh, do you know who's going to be the next interview today at what would be 3 o'clock Eastern Time? Take a wild guess.
I have no idea.
John Longstreet. How's that?
John Longstreet, what a legendary fighter. Yeah, John was the legend. He's another one, transition point karate to kickboxing. So,
well, next week I got Robert Harris.
Oh, yeah. Keith used to talk about his fights with Robert Harris, and it's just, I could sit down and listen to those guys forever. But anyway, back to being Joey Shiflett, we flew out there together. We roomed together. We actually got in a fight because Joey's the type when the referee says stop, to him it means you got like 2 more seconds to hit the guy. He always what we call like the follow up. So we rumbled
Is that where Jay Bell got it from?
I don't know, but Jay Bell, when he was on, there was nobody better than him. But yeah, when the referee says stop, Mike Gentleman, when he judges, he tells people, like in the kids, he says, okay, when I say stop, you stop fighting, do not stop blocking. And I've always carried that in the back of my mind. When I'm fighting these guys, when the referee says stop, that don't necessarily mean that things are going to stop. But anyway, Joey and I got in a rumble, and they had to pull us apart a couple of times. Mike McCoy was the center referee, and I ended up winning the fight. And then, you know what? We ended up going back rooming together, coming back home, ended up being in his wedding as an usher. He married one of my black belt girls. So that's what it was all about. Back then, there was no hard – there was hard feelings when you were fighting. But after it was over, you bumped gloves and everything. When I went to train with Mike Geneva, I had fought him and lost to him like in the first round of some tournaments. And when I went and talked to him, he said, Marty, I tell you what, you come here and train with me. We go back to a tournament. You get on one end, I'll get on the other, and we'll beat the finals. And to that was one of the biggest compliments that anybody could have given me because I was virtually a nobody in karate, and he was an established name. And, you hear tales of people who don't have time for the nobodies, but coming up with Mike and Keith and that group of people, Mike Goldman, Richard Jackson, Joey Shiflett, John Orr, and just names I can't even think of right now. It was always like a family atmosphere. And when I say a family atmosphere, that means we looked out for each other, but boy, on sparring and fight night, we fought like families who were having a feud. And I think that's one of the things that's missing now. Bump gloves, fight, bump gloves, it's over. I think we're kind of missing a little bit of that spirit these days. But, like every athlete always says, his generation was the best generation. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yeah, I think that was, in my time, that was a great generation to be part of fighting of. And you were there at that time, so you know exactly what I mean. You didn't go to a tournament without having to fight your way down, fight after fight after fight to get where you are. And
my hairs are standing up right now. It's not cold over here, and my hairs are standing up because I concur 1,000%. But if I can interject, I want to ask you a question, only because what we do here at the Dojine is get an opportunity for me to give credit where it's due and give an opportunity to the people who I look up to, and a lot of them are shorter than me. You know what I'm talking about? However, if I went to war and I wanted to have an army and I was only allowed to have 300 of them, sir, you are on my army.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from somebody like yourself. Sport karate owes a lot to you. Karate in general owes a lot to you. You've just been an asset to us. And doing what you're doing now, sometimes I know you feel like beating your head up against the wall because trying to get karate people to agree on something is kind of like getting cats to walk in a parade. But, I've loved this sport forever, and we need people like you. One of these days, this thing's going to catch on and be where it's supposed to be. I think the problem with karate right now, there's too many chiefs and not enough Indians. And one of these days, we're going to get it generated into the right direction because when it's done right, I remember sitting in the stands and watching Keith Vitale and Bobby Tucker fight and going like, oh, my goodness, this is just awesome. And when it's done right, when sport karate is done right, whether it's point karate, continuous karate, kickboxing, when it's done right, it is one of the most fascinating sports to watch. But when it's sloppy, it's just sloppy. There's no gray area there. And I think, like I said before, the generation I got to watch and train up under was some of the best technicians in sport karate history.
Well, again, I would have to concur. However, let me just say this. When people say that sport karate has changed, I don't agree because I never changed, neither did you, and I probably know 100 or 200 more people like that still haven't changed. However, I do understand what happened with the competition. I don't agree, and I get it. The team has never been, I should say, the sport's never been a team sport. It's always been individuals. I did not hear you one time mention a team. You mentioned individuals, which make up any sport and make up any what would be team if it was a team sport. However, for whatever it's worth, just for historical facts, in 1988, some of the people from the South got an opportunity to be on the same team along with a few people from the North, and American Airlines was there. And two out of the women that were fighting on my team, of course, were Brenda Hunt and Nikki Carlson, which, of course, these are the maiden names. And in addition to that, there was also a guy who I would assume he was one of your younger cousins because him and Stacy Duke were almost like, twins. And that was Jerry Prince. Jerry Prince.
Jerry Prince was a triple threat. You know, he could do forms, he could do weapons. And what people didn't realize, he was a great fighter. The problem Jerry Prince had as far as fighting concerned was his time in fighting also happened to be at the same time Tony Young's time in fighting was. So, I mean, that's just, Jerry Prince didn't get a whole lot of credit for being a great fighter that he was.
Well, let me tell you, I seen him fight that year. He fought against our buddy there, Mr. Tony Young, and he fought him 3 times where I was in the ring, and 2 out of the 3 times we won, buddy. I think a little extra yelling and screaming for the crazy Puerto Rican might have made a difference.
That could have been. But like I said, Tony Young's such an institution, and Tony and Jerry both, I fought both of them in the ring. And Tony and Jerry both, after it was over with, would always bow, bump gloves, hug, and, where are we going to eat now? It was always like that. They never lost their cool. They never showed out or anything. And they kept the respect level where it is. And, that's a hard thing to do. When you make your name in karate and you're up there and people are gunning for you and they're doing anything they can to try to beat you, because that's the name of the game, to go after the person who's on top. That's, King
of the hill, nothing personal.
Yeah, and that's the way it's supposed to be. But,
yes.
Tony Young and Jerry and guys like that, even Keith, the few times I ever saw Keith Vitale beat, it was always bow, smile, shake hands, and walk away. Nowadays, you don't see the sportsmanship a lot. To use an analogy that you gave me one time, in the 80s, when we fought and tried to score points, it was like shooting a basketball at a goal. We didn't want it to go in. We wanted to swoosh the nets and not even hit the rim. That's what we wanted the point to be like, so clear. And nowadays, people will throw it up there and they'll bounce around the backboard, hit the rim. As long as it goes through, it counts. Well, I mean, both of them worked, but I think we were more technique savvy, to use that term, in our generation than they were today.
Well, if I can interject, let me give you my complete analogy, because when it's all said and done, if they're doing sport karate a point today, then what we did must have been something different, right?
It was a different version, I agree.
Okay, so how about I tell you this? My analogy, my new title for the last 5 years, believe it or not, has been sniper fighting. Sharp, precise, and on point. Why? I know how generations shift, and I don't want to be that old man that's a player hater of this generation. So if they call that point karate or sport karate, let them keep that. We can turn around and do a prequel, and we can say that what we did was sniper fighting, because what was interesting about it, even all of your classmates and your mentors had their original style and flavor. Similar, but nobody would dare to 100% mimic every technique. When today, obviously, there's maybe 2 or 3 styles out there and everybody's doing the same thing, but that's a matter of opinion. So instead of getting mad at them, I looked at what we did. I said, oh, my God, these guys were like snipers. Sometimes it was just one technique. Sometimes it was 2 techniques. They hit center mass, body, and headshots. And man, these guys were freaking incredible, and women alike. But let me just say this. I'm asking you a question only because, again, we want to make sure that people understand that this family of martial artists have a lot of similar characteristics, whether it's the motivation from Bruce Lee or anyone that we saw on television. or movies. In addition to that, we all wanted to test our skills and get better than the best out there. We would rather lose to somebody than to beat nobody, So that was the thing. In addition to that, Karate Illustrated cover was the dream that was taken away from us, which became a nightmare, because a nightmare is a dream too, by the way. So you was right there during the transition. But this is my question. In historical fact, it was 10 years before anyone from New York City was even competing in the national circuit on a consistent basis. And in the mid-'80s, roughly, some New Yorkers started popping up. When was the first time that you saw anything coming from New York?
The first time I saw anything coming from New York was two people. I remember you in 1986 at the U.S. Open. I think you were hurt and couldn't compete that day. But I followed you. I don't know when you started competing, but you were like a middleweight. And as I was headed toward the end of my fighting time, you were one of the young kids coming up. And you're also looking, going like, well, who's coming up? Who do I need to work out? And there was Jerry Fontenez, because I remember, dude, you could just do a side kick straight up in the air. And then there was Billy Blanks. And Billy was like more Boston, Massachusetts way, I think. And but we always considered him up north. And do you remember a middleweight named Tony Overton?
Tony Overton was from Buffalo, New York, lightweight and or middleweight. If you listen to the story with myself and Hanchi Greg Tierney, I went up to Syracuse, New York, because Region 11
Yeah,
Region 11 had these guys, Sam Roberts and Randy Lawrence and Tony Overton, and all these names that I didn't know. So when I looked at the ratings, anyone in the New York area, New York 5 boroughs, I was number 1, but I was really like number 7 in the region. I'm like, what the heck? So I went up to that area and fought Mr. Overton with the incredible back fist that he had, reverse punch and round kick to the head. But yes, from Buffalo, New York. And you're right, Billy Blanks originally from Erie, Pennsylvania, and Billy was the one that taught me how to blitz, by the way. I know you guys called it a slide-up punch, etc. But the point is that Billy started a little before me, but to me, again, hearing it from you is important to me because not anything but just historical facts. Every region always has their leaders. However, there was a point where New York was not represented in what would have been the rest of the country. And I remember taking and making an effort. 1986, I didn't compete because my jaw was broken from Billy Blanks fighting at the Budweiser Liberty Classic when the NKC.
Yeah, I remember. That was it.
So that's why I was there. Tony Morrison ended up beating Robert Harris for first place in his division, which was kind of crazy. And I was with Timok, the Last Dragon, which at the time was my brother-in-law. So, yeah, I was there. And then shortly after that, I think the doors opened up and New York started coming out. Or am I wrong?
You're exactly right, because when we were the region, wasn't that great to open up a magazine, see the region ratings and everything? Well, and like Florida was Region 9, I think. They had just the state of Florida. And we were Region 8, and we had South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, stuff like that. But at the time, if you remember, Jerry, you could name a region, and I could tell you who the top 3 fighters were in each region. Texas, California. We followed. Everybody knew everybody's name, whether you had met them or not. And you knew something about them, and the tournament, results were written up. So I knew about you before I ever saw you. I knew about you winning and everything, and you kind of opened the doors for New York, because before that, New York had, they had these magazines where I think there was a guy named Aaron Banks, and he'd have the Oriental World of Self-Defense, and I don't know that he ever had any competitions going, but you were the first one that believed to come out and go. You got in at the very last time that I think they had the regional ratings. I don't know how many years you got to fight before they completely dropped them and went to the NASCAR format. But back then, you're right, the reason there were no New York fighters, really, you're right, they were from up in, Massachusetts and stuff like that. And now I think New York's probably full of a lot of fighters coming out. But New York, I remember you fighting, and you basically, back then, that's the only name that comes to my mind. I remember fighting that Tony Overton in the finals of the Diamonds one year. And I remember there was one more New York fighter who was a heavyweight, but I can't even remember his name now. but you were the one that came through, leading the way to open the doors. So that should make you feel like your contribution among everything else you've done was at least opening doors to sport karate in New York.
Well, you know what it was? I was just a fan, right? And this is what happened. As being a person who, like anybody else, wants to challenge themselves, or at least I believe New York has the best fighters. But then I asked myself a question. If we have the best fighters, why don't we have nationally rated competitors? And
yeah.
That was the question I asked myself, because, I completely, throughout the years, as you know, psychological warfare has always been part of the edge, whether you was loud and braggadocious the way the Fast Feet character did it, or you was quiet and do your version like Tony Young did, But anyway you put it, the psychological warfare was part of what that gave you the edge. So when I'm in New York, and I'm beating everybody in New York, I figure I'm the best in the world. And then I went to a tournament to test my skills in 1985 at in the Etobicoke, which is a province, a suburb of Toronto, up in Canada. And I lost to Jeff Gears in the first round.
Yep, Jeff Gears out of Ohio, yeah.
Yeah, baby. His power talk is pretty phenomenal, too, by the way. We're getting ready to do part 2 with him, because the first one was 6 years ago. But anyway, what happened was I said, you know what, I guess I'm not that damn good. So I better start improving. I was number 1 in the region fighting hands formed at one time, and I said, wait a minute, I guess I'm not that good. But to answer your question, it's true. 1983 was the first time I got rated regionally. And I wanted to get rated number 10, and then maybe the next year 7, and then eventually go down to number 1 after about 3-4 years. That was my goal, because I started fighting black belt men at age of 16, and at 17 I got rated. But what happened was I got rated, and the magazine was an issue with Toyotaro Miyazaki on the cover, and I came in at number 3. So it messed up my goals, messed up my goals.
Yeah.
And the year before that, I actually competed in what was considered the Day Park Nationals, which was Karate Illustrated only tournament that was rated A. There was no triple A's, that A in Massachusetts, and I actually took 3rd place, combined with a division that I ended up taking 2nd, and another one where I took 1st. So there was a mistake, but otherwise I would have got rated in Region 11 at age 16.
Yeah, well, I ended up being, I was only ranked number 1 in my region maybe a couple of times, because at the time that I was traveling and winning a lot, the highest I ever got was number 3, because Joey Shipley and Tony Young were doing the same thing, and they were having better success than I was. So even when I consider my best years in karate, a lot of those times I ended up number 3, because I was behind 2 legends, Joey Shipley and Tony Young. And the bad thing about sport karate back then is that the divisions were so big that if you had a seed, that really helped you a lot. And Tony and Joey were seeded nationally the year before I went out, and I didn't have a seed, so I had to fight my way all the way down just to, try to get the points. But, back then it was worth it. Everybody knew everybody or knew about everybody. Like I said, you could pick out a region, and you could tell the fighter. You could probably name the top 5 fighters out of each region. You go to Chicago, Larry Tankston there, Scorpion Barrage and all that. You go out to Texas, Ray McCallum. And nowadays, the network is just not like that. It's so watered down and filtered out. But back then, there was one rating system, one circuit, and if you didn't go and earn it, you didn't get it, which is kind of the way it's supposed to be anyway. I'm glad I was a part of that time in our generation of sport karate.
Hey, sir, just 2 things, because I want to be respectful of your time. Time integrity is extremely important to me, but I do want to, since we spent a lot of time in the past, and you did mention briefly some of the stuff in the present and the future, if you don't mind just sharing some of the state of what's happening in your operation now. You mentioned up-and-coming lady and a few things like that, and you still do have your school, which is wonderful. Just give us a little overview of what's happening today.
I think sport karate is so watered down it doesn't mean that much anymore. And that's not taken away from the quality of the fighters, because I see fighters like Raymond Daniels now there. I know the talent's out there. I just think it's so watered down now. I think the NBL is almost gone down to where it's a regional factor. I think it even stays on the East Coast now. NASCAR has a great following, but nobody wants to put any kind of money back into the sport. Now, once again, I don't want to offend anybody, Jerry. This is my personal opinion. In 1985, I went to the Battle of Atlanta. It cost $25 to enter the Battle of Atlanta, and prize money was $100. This year, you go down to the Battle of Atlanta, it was like $75 or $80 to enter, and guess what? There's no prize money in your division. Just a little bit of money to help the players, pay for their hotel and airfare and stuff like that would go a long ways. I think that would help out sport karate. Like I said, I think it's so watered down now that you can go somewhere and win a world championship in one day. I don't believe that. I never got the premise of that. I don't think you have to be legitimate to go to competition. I think competition is the lifeblood of karate. But a lot of people choose not to do competition. I've got no problem with that. I know a lot of traditional-minded schools, they're like that. The problem I have is people who have closed tournaments. I think people who have closed tournaments are the most detrimental to sport karate because they give a false sense of accomplishment to people, where you fight your own people and, you're this, that, and the other. I think closed tournaments are one of the worst things that's ever happened to sport karate. As far as karate is in general, we've got way too much karate in a can schools going on. You could ride by the school with your window down in your car and they'll throw a belt in it. It's too easy. It's too daycare karate. It's too, we're going to do this, that, and the other. You cannot take swimming lessons and not get wet. You cannot take karate and not learn how to spar. I'm all for the forms. I'm all for the weapons. I'm all for everything. But sparring is the backbone of karate. Learning how to protect yourself with your punches and kicks and your skills. I think a lot of schools have gotten away from that now just to up their numbers. I talked to one parent who had their child in what was called a black belt club program that he got his black belt and he had never sparred. And I'm going like, how can you do that? And say, he did all the criteria and everything. I think karate is probably at its weakest now when it should be at its strongest. Think about it, in the 1980s, Jerry, when we were out there, didn't you think 25 years from now or 30 years from then, this would be a huge spectator sport? I don't understand.
It's going back to the future. There was an article we did in 1995. It was called Back to the Future, because if we were already on ESPN TV in Madison Square Garden and making, Bermuda was $5,000 way back when. So those types of things must have been the future.
I guess. And, ESPN was like the rule of thumb. Anytime anybody had a national tournament and you got up, made it to the nighttime finals, you were on ESPN. And Joe Corley was very smart about, like the Battle of Atlanta, to have the Star Wars, but he also managed to have like a title kickboxing fight there. So we had the ESPN tied in back then. It should have been our best time, and I wish I could tell you what was going on. I don't. I just know that the criteria of karate is really kind of watered down now as far as the sport karate is concerned, and it's also the same thing it was back in our day. If you don't have somebody helping you financially or sponsor anything, it's hard to take the money out of your pocket and travel across the nation and fight in a tournament at your own expense, and then have somebody local that's never judged the tournament before calling points because they simply needed more judges. I think somehow we got to address that, and I don't know how to tell you what the solution is, but I could probably what the problem is.
Well, you know what? In a nutshell, I have a strategy and a plan that was tested before, and it comes down to one thing: quality as opposed to quantity.
Absolutely, and that's where we're hurting the most.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, again, throughout the years, I had a chance to test market a bunch of things. Some things that I got praised for, some things that people didn't like. But when it was all said and done, I did it my way, and so did you, Mr. Knight. You keep doing it. Your style and flavor is what I consider that quiet storm. Coming from the South, you're not that Yankee making a noise like me, but we still are brothers.
Yeah, the martial art brotherhood, it runs deep. And I appreciate it coming from, an entrepreneur and an athlete like yourself. It means a lot getting kudos from you. And I appreciate that, Jerry. I just, like I've told a lot of people, I think we're kind of like the last buffalo down here. When our generation of karate people close their doors, I don't know that it's going to not be more than Little League Baseball and soccer programs.
You see what you just said there? I'm going to give you a secret. there's more of us, not us around than people realize. If you get an opportunity to listen to these power talks, you are going to be excited because past, present, and future is being interconnected. Because for whatever it's worth, and this is one of the things that happened, at the Battle of Atlanta this year, I got interviewed not once but twice. And I said, wait a minute. You just walked past at least 10 people who should have been interviewed before me because I'm their fan. And, and I'm like, wait a second. So no one's going to do this for us unless we do it. And because I got, obviously, not just ADD, I got A through Z, I get an opportunity to do something like this that makes me passionate, that I'm passionate about, I should say, and hopefully it'll keep me young. I'm getting ready to be 50 years young shortly, and I know that you're slightly older than that, but still young, right? So,
big 60 this year, man. I'm loving every minute
wow.
of it.
That's what I'm talking about. So we are blessed to be alive and at age 60 to be able to do something that we actually not love, but that we are. It's in our DNA. If you cut us, you're going to have some martial arts inside there. Hey, sir,
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
this is my question to you.
Is just in my
who
life.
You are. I have a question for you, sir. Is there any way possible in the near future that we can have a continuation of this conversation?
Oh, all you have to do is ask. I'm glad to do anything to bring recognition to this sport. And to be included with people like Keith Vitale, I think you said you interviewed Jesse Thornton, you're going to interview John Longstreet. Man, just to be in a company of those people, that's the biggest compliment you could pay to me than anything else.
Well, wait a minute. Isn't that called the truth?
Well,
it's the truth. And I can say that. You don't have to say it. You don't have to say it. I could say it. The truth is the truth, and it shall set you free. And the injustice that has happened in front of me at times, I can't take it anymore. These guys are walking around, and they're pioneers and legends. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. And speaking of a giant, I never had the opportunity to meet him, but I understand there's going to be a wonderful homage that's happening to a person who's alive. Isn't that better than when they die? I mean, rest in peace to those who are dead. But I hear Bobby Tucker's going to have some events, and they're going to give him some homage very soon. So I'm excited
October
about these things.
October 17th. Me, Keith, and Mike Denver are going to speak at a banquet for him.
And this is what I'm talking about. I want to interview him too.
Okay, well, I'm
going to get them all.
I can try and get the numbers to you, and you can go from there.
That's what I'm saying. When it's all said and done, somebody has to take the bull by the horns, and I think, God willing, if this works out the way I plan, there'll be about 10 people like me worldwide doing the same thing for their areas. Because even if there was 100 people, even if there was 100 people doing it, it wouldn't be enough to cover all of the pioneers and legends, men and women and children who we are fans of and family members with.
Well, I'm glad you're trying to get it done because it needs to be done.
Well, I appreciate it. So you'll be able to see and listen to this within the next little while today at dojine.com/night, which is singular for the time being until we get a bunch of other nights. But my sincere pleasure. I appreciate you, and I'm going to take you on that public commitment for you to come in the future and actually share some more information. And hopefully, and maybe if you have content, whether it's some of those how-to videos, and, I even want to put a section here that I remember from Official Karate called What Happened? Where are they now? Or whatever happened to? So I'm going to do a whatever happened to section because I would love to be able to have a conversation with some of these people, and quite a few of them are definitely, speaking the word of God, I must say, from my experience that I'm speaking to. But any other last words that you want to say right now, sir?
It's just an honor to be part of this. Like I said, it's just an honor to be associated with the guys you're interviewing. It's an honor to be associated with you guys. You've been an entrepreneur and an athlete, and like I said, I'm glad to be part of this group of people that has made an impact. It truly humbles me to think I've made any kind of impact on these people, and that, have watched my career and everything. And like I said, it's an honor to speak with you, buddy. And if there's anything else I can ever do, just give me a call.
Well, I appreciate it. So the way we end is in the famous words of some crazy Puerto Rican from the Bronx, when I say AB, Mr. Knight, you say see ya. AB,